Yeah,
when we should start.
and we are recording, so
And
whenever
we
you're
are
ready.
okay. Welcome everybody to History Matters, and as always, so does coffee. It was only in the last day or two that I realized this is the last History Matters before the election. That's a sentence that I can't believe just came out of my mouth, but it did. And that is why today, in one way or another, we're going to be talking about democracy, which is a good thing to think about before an election. But before I plunge into that, I am going to turn to my partner in crime, Matt, who will explain the rules of the game as we get going.
And good morning, everybody. Welcome. I hope that you are all having a great week and are, those of you who can vote, voted or are planning to vote. So the rules of the game are as follows, as usual, which are please use the chat to tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world. Just keep it germane and germane to our conversation and family friendly. If you do have questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A section of the webinar. That is found at the bottom of your screen.
You need coffee.
What's that?
You need coffee.
I really do. I really do. I've only had like a cup and a half, so I'm not nearly up to par yet.
Okay.
But make sure you put those in the Q&A because that is where we get the questions from everybody. That's where, so that helps us make sure that everybody's questions get addressed that we can, and nothing gets lost in chat. So please put those there. If you missed last week's news and missed some of our tweets, I do want to mention that we do have some pretty big events coming up at the National Council of History Education. Most notably, on December 17th, we're welcoming Pete Souza, former chief photographer for President Obama and President Reagan, and for a conversation about photographs as primary sources and their link to history. So very excited about that. And as always, if you do enjoy what we do here at the National Council for History Education, please go to our webpage, www.ncheteach.org, and look around. We have a conference coming up. We have some fantastic resources available for you on the website. And of course, please join us if at all possible. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanne begin our conversation today.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Matt, as always. Okay, so I've been struggling in one way or another all week to talk about this week and next week. I taught a class Wednesday, I taught a class Tuesday. And in both classes, I wanted to somehow say to my students something about the significance of the moment, but I wanted to do it in a way that would make them think and that would not paralyze them, but that would get across some urgency. This explains the title change of today's episode of History Matters. Initially, I had some title like, democracy, a long, hard fight or something like that, which it has been, continues to be. But I went to bed on that, thinking about that title. Then I woke up yesterday morning and I thought, yep, that doesn't, I'm feeling more urgency than that title is allowing for, which is why I changed the title of today's episode to Democracy, a Plea. That got across more of what I was trying to say. And that's kind of going to be along the lines of what I'm talking about this morning. And, thinking about this episode, I couldn't help but think back to the first episode of History Matters 7 months ago. 7 months ago. So during that episode, I talked about contingency. And the reason I talked about contingency is I, on the one hand, didn't want people to think that everything was going to be fine and they didn't have to worry about anything. And on the other hand, I didn't want people to think that we're going to hell in a handbasket, everything is bad, and we're sunk. Those two extremes were bad. And what was important to remember was also important to remember when you study history, and that is contingency. And There was a Hamilton document. Actually, we're coming right around back to Hamilton today, but there was a Hamilton document in which he was thinking about what might happen after the Constitutional Convention, and he had all of these possibilities, and then said, basically, I don't think this thing is going to work. And that to me was a fine example of the contingency of that moment to a degree that we don't normally see. So in one way or another, for 7 months, I have been saying every week, some version of contingency matters, right? In one way or another, I have been saying what you do, you here and watching me and not watching me, what you think, how you respond, how you evaluate, your presence in this moment and the way you are responding and processing this moment matter a lot. In a democratic mode of government, that is true, right? I mean, it's a cliche to say, you know, we the people matter in a democratic mode of government. It's a cliche that happens to be true. So today, that's what I want to talk about. But the first thing I want to do, maybe it's going to be a little bit counterintuitive, and that is, people were talking about earlier before we began filming, taping, whatever it is that we're doing technologically, about a Dan Rather tweet in which he said, let's just call a lie, right? He says, I love words, let's use the right word. And in a sense, that's part of the spirit of what I want to do right now, because I think people throw around the word democracy in a lot of different ways, often to stand in for something else, as a buzzword, as a lazy way of saying, I am righteous in what my politics are. And there are all kinds of reasons why people use that word, and many of them have nothing to do with the meaning of the word. And I think we're in a moment right now, we're sort of awash in a sea of words that have no meaning that people are using all the time. I kind of want to write about this, and there might be an op-ed in my near future. Because if you think about it, democracy is one of them, but socialism, fascist, authoritarian, communist, right? People are throwing these words back and forth at each other with basically no sense of what they mean, or very little, or a really inaccurate sense of what they mean, right? I mean, the number of ways in which socialist is being tossed around, anyway, the fact is all of those words have meanings. The meanings matter. They also all have a history. History matters. But it's really easy, particularly in politics, in the realm of rhetoric, as we've also talked about in the past, to get swept up in the words and to lose track of the meanings. When I teach my courses at Yale, I always tell my undergraduates they're not allowed to use what I call democraspeak. And by that, I mean they can't write papers that say liberty, freedom, independence, democracy, and then hand them to me. Because yes, those are all interesting, good words, but if you're going to use them, they darn well better have a meaning. You can't throw them in a paper and think, yay, I wrote about the revolution. So that's in the spirit of what I'm talking about now. So I want to talk about democracy, and I want to get past the word democracy to really talk about some of what it is and some of what it means. And I thus picked two documents to offer you for this week, for us to look at this week. Because I think they get at a couple different elements of democracy that it's important for us to bear in mind now. So let's first look at Hamilton. Okay, so Hamilton, so in the case of both letters, the Hamilton letter I've chosen and the Jefferson letter I've chosen, they are among the last letters that both men wrote, which in and of itself is really interesting. So this is July of 1804. And Hamilton basically, as you can see in the letter, basically says, I'm really busy and I've wanted to write, and this is fascinating, right? I wanted to give you a sense of my future plans. Okay, so just, no, he's not committing suicide on the dueling ground. I wanted to give you a sense of my future plans, and I don't have time. So I'm going to say one important thing. And here's the one important thing. Dismemberment of our empire will be a clear sacrifice of great positive advantages without any counterbalancing good, administering no relief to our real disease, which is democracy. Okay, that's quite a statement. And particularly now when, given the musical, Hamilton is a hero of sorts, and he's a hero who his politics aren't really attached to him often in the way that we think about him culturally. But the fact of the matter is he did not fully trust what he would have considered to be the whims of the populace. He wanted filters, structured filters, institutional filters. And he felt that democracy, in his mind, the sort of direct pressure of the people, not in elections, but outside of elections, that could be dangerous. So the real disease was democracy, because the people could push and force and protest and do all kinds of things that would force the government into places where, in his mind, it shouldn't go. And in his mind, the people shouldn't be leading that way. They put us in office and we lead the way, and that's how it should work. So by his understanding, he's talking about democracy as this sort of direct insistence, not necessarily through votes. He believed in elections, free and fair elections, most of the time, not in 1800, but most of the time. But in this case, he's talking about the directly imposed will of the people out of doors, I guess would have been the way that they put it. So uneasy with democracy, I sometimes call it the politics of the street, which kind of also gives a sense that it's out of doors. But so one of Hamilton's last letters says, democracy is the disease of this republic, although he does use the word empire, which is interesting too. Okay, so that's Hamilton saying, democracy is trouble. And particularly if this union is divided, it's going to get worse, and we're really going down. Okay, so now we go to Jefferson, many years later, but still towards the end of his life. And he's invited to take part in, I believe, a July 4th celebration. And he writes back to say, I'm really sorry I can't, but let me bestow you with some of my words. Oh, and Newby wants to bestow his words too. Thank you, Newby. Okay, so why did I know? So Jefferson, it's a little longer quote, but I'm going to read it here. He's talking about the founding of the United States. And he says, may it be to the world what I believe it will be, the signal of arousing men to burst the chains under which monkish ignorance and superstition had persuaded them to bind themselves, and to assume the blessings and security of self-government. The form which we have substituted restores the free right to the unbounded exercise of reason and freedom of opinion. All eyes are opened or opening to the rights of man. The general spread of the light of science has already laid open to every view the palpable truth that the mass of mankind has not been born with saddles on their backs, nor a favored few booted and spurred, ready to ride them legitimately. Okay, so he doesn't necessarily use the D word there, but it's the same idea. And he of course, is speaking in full Enlightenment form, right? That the Enlightenment and understanding the principles of nature and science all lead us to understand about the rights of man and how they can survive and how they can be threatened. Self-government, right? That's what he says. We've done this experiment, and it's an experiment in self-government, and may it spread around the world and teach everyone else about self-government and the rights of man. So he's focusing on freedoms, but he's really talking in a sense about democracy as being one of the grand gifts that the United States, in his mind, hopefully gives to the world. Now, a couple of things are evident there. Both men are talking in one way or another about democracy. Hamilton uses the word. Clearly, they feel very differently about it, but also clearly there were different meanings of the word at the time, which is important if we're talking about words and meanings. So for some people, and you see that if you look through the letters and writings of the founding era, some people believe democracy to be, and I say this actually in the first lecture of my American Revolution course, which is online, they believe democracy to be a government in which every person directly participates, no representation. And in that sense, the founders were like, yeah, no, that's not what we're looking for. But, you know, there are other times in which people use the word democracy or democratic to mean a representative government. Same thing, a republic can be democratic, usually is. It's based on representation. So the words are bouncing around, even the word republic as well. You know, I think Adams has a quote, which I always slaughter, which is something like, there are as many definitions of the word Republican as there are, small r Republican as there are Republicans. So they're processing and inventing and trying to figure out the meanings of the words at that time. But even then, right? The words are fuzzy. And in a sense, they never stop being fuzzy because they're so important, because they're so powerful, because they have such powerful meanings, and because they're so tied to what the United States is claiming to be and is working towards being. So if we think about democracy as, among other things, a representative government, we can stick that in, and regardless of your meaning, unless you're back in the 18th century saying it represents every single person taking part, that is a true fact, suggesting that we, the people, hold the power and assign that power to others. That's the fundamental dynamic of our constitutional pact. Because of that, because we assign power, it means a democratic government can be kind of fluid and very adaptable in ways both good and bad. It means that the spirit and structures of government can change depending on what Hamilton would have called the whims of the people, right? Our whims. If you're open to the voice of the people, the voice of the people is unpredictable. That's part of why Hamilton is uneasy about it. But that means there's a possibility for dramatic change of any number of kinds. That adaptability, that ability to really dramatically change, can be frightening. It means that power holders can lose power in ways that they might not want to. It means that the fundamental political mindset of a government, their view of a nation and the nation they have power over, can change dramatically. It basically allows for us, for we the people, to change things as we will to some degree. And sometimes for power holders or people who want to be in power, like Hamilton, that feels like a risky, dangerous, and irresponsible thing. And it feels as though it's depriving them of something that, in a sense, they feel entitled to, which is power, the power to control, the power to lead, the position that they feel that they themselves belong in. So there's a sense of entitlement there. But the fact of the matter is, democracy does allow for adaptability. That is true. But another way in which it's important, and I think of this all the time, because another way in which we're battling with the idea of democracy right now is, can we really talk about democracy in the United States, given all of the ways in which we don't meet it? All of the way, and in a sense, all of the ways in which we've never met it, right? And it's an ideal democracy that we, the people, rule. There are all kinds of holes in that ideal. Who are the people? Like, who's the we? And what can they do and what can't they do? And how easy is it for them to do it? All of those things are questions. We have never absolutely met that ideal. We've been excluding people from the we for as long as we've been a nation. Totally true, which makes it totally valid to be angry at the ways in which our democracy has not lived up to what it can be. But the fact of the matter is that kind of ideal is vitally important. It can be a tool for people to claim their rights. They can point to that and say, well, if this is a democratic government, I have rights, right? So it becomes a way for people who are disempowered to claim power. It can be used as a way of highlighting the sins and shortcomings of government, for pointing out hypocrisy if people are claiming to be democratic, but you can say, oh yeah, well, this is what democracy means, and you're not doing that. It becomes a tool, a kind of hammer and a wrench, a way to demand and insist and correct in a way that even if we're not meeting it at a given moment, the fact that it's there matters. It's a thing that we claim to support. No one right now is stepping forward and saying, I hate democracy. Well, maybe some people are, and I haven't seen them, but fundamentally, people of all kinds of politics are not saying to heck with democracy in so many words, right? They're saying, oh no, United States, a democracy, blah, blah, blah. Whether they're living up to that, you can decide. So people are hanging on to the buzzword democracy, but the ideal of democracy is important for us to understand, to value, and to use, because of its power, to use to highlight people who are not living up to that ideal, to use to demand our voice is heard, our rights are protected. Now, you know, I've been struggling. I've been struggling for years at this point and it's just become a worse and worse struggle over time. I've been struggling to communicate to people, as I suggested at the outset, the degree to which this election matters, the degree to which democracy is in danger. And, you know, I've not wanted to sound like such an alarmist at such an early point that people will tune me out at a point when they need to listen. I haven't wanted to sound too sort of mellow about it, in which people will be like, whatever, she's some egghead academic, you know, spouting off. So I've been constantly like, you know, it's important, but you know, we can still do something, which I suppose is still what I'm saying. But the fact of the matter is, and I've said it all over the place on Twitter as bluntly as I can say it in the last couple of days, democracy is on the ballot. When you are voting, you need to be thinking about what form of government you want. And you have the freedom still to vote that way. Ideally, you still can get to a polling place, and you know, that's a whole other issue, which I will not go into. But I do believe that democracy is on the ballot, and I do believe that you need to think about that when you either have cast your vote, will be casting your vote, and in the months and actually years ahead, you need to be, in all of the ways that we've been talking about here for 7 months, you need to understand what it is, the government structures and institutions and norms that help to uphold it, that are protective of us, that defend and allow us to enforce our rights. Democracy means that the government and the people are working together. And it means that we, the people, matter. Our desires, our choices, our protections, our options, our votes. Some of those things I think are in peril in some ways right now. And I, again, don't say that to paralyze you. I say that to motivate you to do all of the things that we've talked about for 7 months, to watch what's happening, to act on what you see, to fight for your rights, to not surrender to the moment, to be alert, aware citizens who understand that you matter, what you want matters, regardless of your view, and you have a right to express that. We all do, and we all should. Even if that is not been, we've not met that ideal in the past, that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep fighting for it. And Newbie has very strong feelings about democracy. Now, I want to sort of come to an end here with a Hamilton quote, which I went and I looked this morning on Twitter. I tweeted it in 2018. Tells ya, like I said, years I've been talking about this. So this is a Hamilton quote. It's from Federalist 8. I don't remember what month, but 2018, I tossed it off on Twitter. This is what he says. The violent destruction of life and property incident to war, the continual effort and alarm attendant on a state of continual danger, will compel nations the most attached to liberty to resort for repose and security to institutions which have a tendency to destroy their civil and political rights. To be more safe, they at length become willing to run the risk of being less free. That's pretty blunt. And that's, you can understand that sentiment, right? To be more safe, people surrender liberties and surrender rights under the assumption that they will feel safer, but they surrender rights. And once you surrender rights, Hamilton says this at other points too, once you surrender rights, it's really hard to get them back, right? So all of this is saying that in one way or another, awareness, alertness, and action, right? Last week or whenever I talk about the 3 C's, I now have 3 A's, basically. Awareness, action, alertness, watch what's happening, act on it, and think about the fact that you have rights, you deserve those rights. We all do, we don't all have them equally. And we should stand up for them. That's not actually a very radical thing to say, but I think it's a fact. So my point here, in a sense, is I'm talking a little bit about the election. I'm also talking a little bit about what's to come after the election, regardless of what happens in the election. That democracy clearly, this is going to sound like it's obvious, but in some ways, I don't feel right now like it is for some people. Democracy is an ideal worth defending. I think sometimes when I'm out in the world talking, I don't know if people really understand, as I sort of started out by saying, really what democracy is, and that it's a thing and not just a word. It is a thing with value, and when it goes away, it matters, and you will know it. And I want people to understand that in this moment and in moments near to come, because that's just a fact. And it means that what we are doing and thinking is important. So along those lines, I'm encouraging everyone here to hold firm, to help others to hold firm in this moment, to protect your rights, to think about your rights, to be aware of your rights, and to protect your rights, to protect our right to free and fair elections. We may not always achieve that, but we should never forget the fact that we have that right, and that it's worth defending. To basically agree and remember that the Constitution is a pact that we make with each other and that we make with government. It's a pact that offers rules and standards and to some degree a kind of ethic about what kind of nation we're going to be and how we together as a people will put leaders in office and run this nation together. So that too, you know, again, the Constitution even it has become a word being tossed around a lot. I'm not going to even go into originalism at this particular moment, but the Constitution isn't just a bunch of words. It represents a pact. It is literally a kind of treaty of power, and it matters. And it needs to be protected too if our rights are going to be protected. So I don't think it's too extreme to say that democracy is in danger right now. I know, and I know because all of you have been tuning in for 7 months with me, or most of you, I know that you love this country as much as I do. I know that you do. And I know that if asked, you would say that you respect the constitutional pact that we have signed onto and its spirit and its structure, that you love that too. And I'm touching on all of that. I'm touching on the simple basic fact that we love this country, that we want the best for it, and that we want to preserve what was created as an ideal and work towards achieving it, not towards damaging it. For all of those reasons, for political reasons, for social reasons, and for personal reasons, of course our nation means something to us. Of course, we should want to protect it. We should do all that we can do. Love your country. I know you do. Allow that love to push you to act responsibly, to do what you can to defend it and what it stands for, to not feel paralyzed, to not surrender, to not see an election result and assume everything has been decided, because it won't be, regardless of what happens. Remember how much you love your country, how everyone around you, maybe not everyone, most people around you do too. And remember that and cling to that and let that inspire you, because it's really needed right now. I knew I was not going to make it through that without getting teary. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop right there. Okay, I'm going to stop. We've reached time, and we can open things up to conversation, except that, of course, I think some of you probably, God, mess I've made of myself. Some of you probably predicted based on the size of my mug. I've got lipstick all over it, darn it. Which mug I'm holding. It's appropriate for this week because it says, yay, history. Mm-hmm. History is going to help us in this moment. So it's not even just, I love a newbie mug, which I do. It's also thematically appropriate. And thank you, Matt, for finding a way to get this to me.
I'm glad you got it already.
Well, I got it yesterday. And this is actually right this morning is the first time I had it in hand.
Oh, good.
So anyway, the fact that it's there is wonderful. But yes, yay, history. History is important as we march forward. And now, as I said, I will stop talking and we can open things up.
Oh. And I'm using our other mug, the History Matters mug.
You have to move it. There we go. And I love that too, I have to say.
It's a really nice mug too.
Yeah. Okay, now behind you, some people know and some people don't.
Yes. So this is the ballroom at the Powell House in Philadelphia. This is the home of Elizabeth Willing Powell, who was, depending on the historian, either a socialite or a politically savvy, well-connected human being during the Revolutionary time. I choose the latter. She is often overlooked and is somebody who had a lot of clout actually during the time. Would you agree, Joanne, with that?
Yeah.
Does that seem reasonable? I chose this today because she is actually the one who asked one of the more famous questions in history, that, or anecdotal history, if you will, which was, well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? And to which Dr. Franklin replied, a republic if we can keep it, or if you can keep it. So she is the one who asked the question, and it was so that's why I chose this for today.
Which is excellent, and which highlights the fact that it has long been forgotten that a woman asked that question.
Yes.
And so it is wonderful to put that back in. It's
yes.
not just
I was
Franklin.
originally going to go with something from Franklin, and then I was looking into it a little bit more, and I remembered who actually asked the question, and I thought that is the question is as, if not more important than the quip.
Which gets back, actually, before we go into questions, I did just see a comment that I want to agree with. Someone just said, I don't know where it is, not just to protect your own rights, but to protect the rights of others of all kinds, which of course I mean that too. So I'm not just saying we all care about ourselves, support democracy. If it sounded that way, I didn't mean it that way. And whoever said that, and now I can't find it, I'm skimming through here. Of course it means to protect our rights and to protect the rights of anyone else around us in this country. It's not a selfish thing or a personal thing. It's a shared thing. That's the point of it. So thank you, whoever that was, I missed it, for highlighting that. Okay.
And give me 1 second.
Okay. Newbie totally agrees with this conversation. Okay. Oh, an ABC book. An ABC book on like words and what they mean. Wow. That's actually.
We don't have a ton of questions, so if you have questions, get them in here, I do have my weekly threat. It's still in effect.
Well, I'd be curious to hear. I did this with my students yesterday, my undergraduates yesterday. I met individually with them one by one because they're all writing papers, and they gave me a prospectus, and I read through it and commented on it and gave it back. And yesterday was my time to meet with them one by one and talk about their papers. And I asked them all, how are you doing? And they all said, okay. And then I said, underneath the autopilot, okay, how are you really doing? And then they all had something to say, right? And I said this actually on Twitter yesterday. What was fascinating was some of them were upset and disturbed, mostly because everything feels unstable. And they have nothing to grab onto. And some of them are, not even in a dorm. They're off campus living somewhere in a room, and all of this is going on, and they don't have their families. And so some of it, they were afraid of instability. Some of them were nervous. Mostly they were focused on their schoolwork. I assumed I'd ask that question and they would all say, oh, the election, I'm feeling so tense. It's like, no, actually, a whole bunch of them, that's not what they said, which is why I'm glad I asked it, because not everyone, particularly not our students, are going to be in the same space. But some of them were very focused on the election, but not thinking necessarily about democracy, but thinking about the climate, thinking about the future, thinking about climate change as going basically abandoned depending on this election, which was interesting. They're thinking about the future, which makes perfect sense. So I give you that long lead up because in a sense, I wonder how you folks are all doing out there underneath the autopilot. Okay. If you want to ask questions, I'm happy to do that. Oh, someone just, and I just saw someone say, which song in Hamilton had the democracy is poison line? Yeah, they left that out. And it is true that the musical makes him out to be this, raised himself up by his bootstraps, loves immigrants, and is an immigrant guy, which he was not, really not. And I wrote at some point a piece, I think in Slate, on the missing politics in Hamilton. And this is another example of that. Yeah, they left out the democracy is poison line in Hamilton. I don't know where it would fit in, but yeah. Go ahead.
And also, Annette Gordon-Reed also wrote a little bit about the things that are missing from, like, really important things that are missing from the.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I'll see if I can find it. My last week of class for my undergrads, we started out by talking about what we think about the founders, not talking about the musical, but just coming into the course. What are people thinking about the founders? And now the last week, we're going to come back and basically ask that question again, a lot more informed. And the musical is free game in the last week. So anyway, I'll see if I might have collected together a lot of articles. And if I have, I'll pass them along. Oh, there it is. Look at Caroline, man. She's like, bing, here's the link to the website, How Hamilton Uses History by Joanne Freeman. Yes. And there's also Historians on Hamilton, an edited volume of people who talk about lots of issues having to do with the play, and many of them having to do with its politics or its absence of politics. Okay, I'm going to, once again, shut up. Are there questions, Matt, that
there are a few. Folks are putting these in. Let's see, Tom P. This isn't from earlier, and it's a good question to pose, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, Tom. I think you framed it really well, but I think the end of the question is where I'm going to head here, which is, has there ever been a time in American history in which creeping despotism might have had such disastrous consequences as we've talked about here today?
Well, I mean, I think creeping despotism always has disastrous consequences. I think the difference right now is, or at least what it seems to me is that in the same way that people generally, whether they're acting small d democratic or not, they pledge like, we are for democracy. Generally speaking, people stand behind the Constitution, right? And whether they're saying like originalists, like, I believe in the Constitution in the way James Madison did or whatever, they're still allowing for the fact that the Constitution, even if for them it's only in a symbolic way, is at the center of what we're doing. The current moment, that's not necessarily true. The current moment, I think there are some people who are, what's the word I want to use? Manipulating, shaping, warping, doing all kinds of creative things with rules and norms and standards of how we normally proceed, and not really focusing on the pact, the Constitution, in a way that is more blatant than we've probably seen it in modern times. And it's the blatant sort of whatever sort of spirit of this moment that makes this particular creeping despotism so powerful, because it's possible for someone to be in power who will just do a bunch of anti-constitutional things. And I don't think, faced someone before who's that blunt and kind of joyous about it. And has a lot of people who don't, which is why I talked about this today, has a lot of people who agree with them, who I think just don't understand what democracy is, what it gives you, and what you lose when it goes away. I think around the world, I don't think this is just American, I think around the world, people have kind of lost track of what democracy is, and that it's just a word, and it's being threatened all over the place. I don't think we're sitting here alone in that. But I think it's when you begin to question the fundamentals, the structures, the institutions, that creeping despotism can become galloping despotism. And so, we're sort of on that border, I guess I would say now. We're in that world now, I'll put it that way.
Tom M asks, what arguments made in the anti-federalist papers would seem relevant or scary in today's environment?
Relevant or scary? Well, relevant would be the fact that the main contribution of the anti-federalists during the constitutional debate was demanding a Bill of Rights, right? Puts us right where we are, right? So the Anti-Federalists, and they were a diverse group, but a thing that they agreed on was, well, if you're going to grant all of this power to a government, you darn well better have a Bill of Rights preserving our rights, right? Rights front and foremost alongside power. Now, some of the Federalists argued, why do we need a Bill of Rights, right? The government only has the power that's in the document. I think that there was a logic to that, but I think the logic of demanding a Bill of Rights was good and proved itself good in not that many years down the road when people began arguing about how much power the Constitution actually had. So that would be a main relevant point, which is the Constitution was not from the get-go the pact that I'm now saying it is. It's that pact because it, in ways that are not part of the original document, protects our rights. The Bill of Rights is kind of what enforces the spirit of that document and the spirit of our government. And it's why people, Amendment number 1, people point to them all the time. Again, not necessarily in the right spirit of things. Sometimes they're using them in interesting ways. But that's why that's probably the most pointed to part ever of the Constitution is the Bill of Rights, because that's the part that affects all of us directly in ways that we recognize. And that's the Anti-Federalists represented that spirit. I'm cruising through. I know I hate when I look back sometimes to get a glimpse of what this looks like. I always see myself like sort of looking at the corner of the screen to see if I move chat up a little bit, I won't be glancing at the corner of the screen so much. Let's see here. Okay. I do have a point that I want to make while you're thinking.
No, go ahead. There's a couple other questions, but please do.
Okay. The point I wanted to make, and I think Beth suggested something a few minutes ago. Beth said, I think what many people have lost is the understanding that when you insist on your own rights, you may threaten, if not trample on the rights of your neighbors. And I wanted to go back to that point because a thing that appears to be forgotten in this moment by some is, I call it in my book, the we of us, the idea of a we, which connects directly to what Beth is saying, which is, yeah, you demand your rights. And all of what I said, I believe, but the fact of the matter is, we are a we, right? So you don't like paying taxes. It's like, well, do you like having an educational system, even if you don't have kids? Do you like having good roads, even if you don't have a car? Like, do you want to have a nation that's actually a nation rather than all of us sort of living lives that are nasty, brutish, and short, right? And I do think that people have lost a sense of civic spirit and taking care of the we in this moment. And I think because people are scared, it's a natural response for people to be like, my rights, I'm scared. But sometimes it's very blatant and distressing to see the degree to which, people are adamantly not thinking about other people sometimes. And yeah, you'd be just like, yes, the degree to which that makes rights mean me, and it means much more than that. Other people have the same rights as you, and that's part of the importance of democracy.
Let's see. So there's some questions about sort of Bill of Rights / SCOTUS. And so the first one is from Lenore, who says, people are especially worried about the widespread prevalence of guns to back up the anti-democratic impulses. Have you had a session on the Second Amendment in its historic context?
I have not done a session on that. I have been deeply conflicted on talking about violence and guns in the current moment. As you can imagine, given my last book, Lurking Over There, The Field of Blood, Violence in Congress on the Road to Civil War, I'm being asked a lot to step forward and talk about the possibility of violence. And by doing that, I fear that that's encouraging it in some way. So I haven't. And as a matter of fact, I got an email a day or so ago that was like, I understand you don't want to necessarily do that right now, but depending on what happens, would you do it? And I was like, yeah, sure, depending on what happens. But I haven't. And I guess that's partly because that's such a heated issue that goes so far beyond the document, that I just haven't, even apart from whatever our current moment is, I haven't taken that on. And it's a good, I'm sort of pausing here because I'm thinking about what down the road, what I might do. And I might think about that more down the road. That's a great instance of a belief versus a truth where fear drives things, right? They're coming for our guns. Look, I don't really think people plan on barging into people's homes and taking away all their guns, but the fear of that by gun owners, I understand that that's a fear. It's just not a totally grounded fear. So anyway, that's a long way of saying no. I haven't yet, but that doesn't mean that I won't.
That he won't. Lois asked a question about the comments by Justice Kavanaugh, but I think more broadly, since yesterday there were two decisions, or two declinations more than anything else by the Supreme Court about voting. So can we talk a little bit about the voting, the comments that have been made by most prevalent in the news, Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Gorsuch about voting, and then of course the two decisions by the court to not take up the extended deadlines cases in North Carolina and, forgive me, I'm blanking on the other one, Wisconsin, I think is the other one. So let's talk Pennsylvania. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the voting in the context of what we talked about here today.
Okay, so voting in the context of what we talked about here today, as a right? Yeah,
like how yeah, but let's start there.
I mean,
for lack of a better place to start, let's start there.
Yeah, and you guys can feed in depending on where you want that to go, but the most obvious starting point for that is it's the most fundamental right. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm here blathering about democracy and our voice and our options and protections and protecting others and keeping a sense of a we and blah, blah, blah. If you don't have the vote, you can't do any of that. If you don't have the vote, you are basically just standing back and watching things happen. So, and there's a reason why throughout American history, voter suppression of one kind or another has been enforced, because the best way to keep your own power is to keep power away from people who might threaten your power, right? So, pick a period, but Jim Crow all by itself, right? And all the various ways in which people were, interestingly, discouraged or prevented from voting in weird indirect ways that were very effective, but yeah, you need to pay a poll tax, like here, pass a test. They're not saying, no, we just don't want you to vote. They're saying, oh no, it's all democratic, it's a free and fair election. Oh, you can't pass that test? I'm so sorry, you can't vote. So it is the most fundamental right, which is why the current moment is so, what's going on in the current moment, and particularly, it's not a surprise that this week is seeing a huge flourish of it. We're seeing people making claims about who can and can't vote, but who will or won't be able to vote depending on what's available to them. And that's just, it's a form of voter suppression is what it is. And that's a claim for power. And that's really beyond vitally important, because that's the source of our power. The usefulness of saying that right now is not just like we're going through it and we can act on it. It's because at some point we need to protect our voting rights, perhaps in a way that right now they are not protected. So that's a good thing to bear in mind down the road, and to not forget that, I think we've forgotten a lot of things in the last 50 years or so, including maybe much of this century, how hard it is to preserve and maintain a democracy, and that it requires work. I think we've been coasting on democracy works and we love ourselves, and we're now at a point where it's like, it doesn't always work. Mm-hmm. And you can't coast. You have to work. You have to be informed, and you have to work to keep it. So that, which again, part of circling back, that's part of why we're talking about what I suggested today.
Right.
So,
and to be fair, let's remember that it's not like this week they just, folks in power across the country have decided we're going to do this. This is enabled in a lot of different ways, both through the legislation enacted in states, legislation enacted federally, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 a few years ago by the Supreme Court. Like there are structures within our constitutional democracy that have enabled this to happen, and we've seen this happen throughout history, right? As Joanne mentioned, we had Jim Crow laws and poll taxes, and through the segregationist era in the 20th century, like we have evidence of the past of this idea that only certain people should be allowed to cast their vote. And what we're seeing now is just a new reflection of a very old historical problem.
And I want to, this is Beth, number 2 that I'm going to refer to, but because what you said actually just rang true for me. Beth says the long lines to vote are beautiful, except that there shouldn't be lines at all. Yeah, so, and I've seen that interplay on Twitter where people have been saying, yay, democracy. And then other people have been saying, it shouldn't be like that, and I had that response, my initial response, I said at some point, because I was feeling low, I said on Twitter, okay, people, post your images of you voting, going to the polling place, dropping in your ballot, just post images. And all of these people began posting images of them standing in front of the polling place, whatever it was, lots of people. It's actually a pretty beautiful thread. So I went back to look at it and I saw all of these images and all of these people, and they're smiling and they're excited and they're voting. And I burst into tears because it was seeing that spirit and seeing that action made me cry. It made me feel a sense of encouragement in a way that I hadn't felt for a while. I've just been worried. But my instant response after that was outrage. Right after the crying, I was like, and look at this. I took a photograph of myself holding my absentee ballot and wearing a mask because I thought in the future, we will all remember in one way or another this moment, but I want to remember me being masked, not being able to go to my normal polling place because I'm, sheltering in place. I want to remember the reality of this because none of this should be happening, and certainly not to the degree and the severity with which it's happening. So, yeah, so democracy on the one hand, what we're watching is encouraging, and the spirit of it is, I don't know, not just invigorating, but kind of necessary. It's feeding a hunger, certainly for me. But it also is showing voter suppression in some ways in action. Of course, it's also showing so many people voting that some of the lines are simply because so many people are voting. So anyway, so be moved and be outraged at the same time. I guess certainly that is what I am at this moment.
Okay, I had another question which is totally off kilter, and we only have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to ask.
Oh yeah, okay.
We'll save it for the after party. Let's end with Becky's question, which is, why is the so it's a little bit of a loaded question, so I'm going to slightly rephrase. I'll read you what she said and then I'll rephrase it, which is, she writes, why is the phrase "provide for the general welfare" such a problem for so many people? And which I'm reading it because I knew you'd enjoy that, but for the purposes of the show, let's phrase it as, let's talk about some of those elements that are guaranteed in the preamble. Provide for the general welfare being sort of a prominent one.
Well,
let's talk about those. Are we living up to them?
Well, right. I mean, I'm going to, given that we have 1 minute left, I'm going to sum this up too briefly. But we the people, is a specific and broad statement. The general welfare is another way of saying we interpreted broadly. People now are simply not often considering the general welfare in a really direct, blunt, kind of surprising way. Sometimes I'm not going to plunge into how, but I'm sure you all have them in your brain right now. I'm thinking particularly of something that some people are doing and some people aren't doing that might spread slow the spread of a disease, for example. I think we're in a moment when people feel in different ways, feel so threatened and so fearful that general welfare is just not on the radar screen for them right now. I can't speak about throughout time, whether that's true or not, but in this moment, kind of related to the comment, the quote that I gave from Hamilton, in this moment with people scared of what's going to happen and scared of change and scared of losing power and scared of not getting power, whatever it is, all of the ways with a pandemic and a big election and everything else, fear is driving thought and politics, and it's driving people to think me and not us and not we. And in a democracy, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. And there we are.
Well, that's a good way to end for today. And I'll let Joanne wrap up here in a second. I'll just give my quick spiel, which is this great conversation. We will continue in the after party here in a moment. But in the meantime, 2 comments. First, if you do like what we do here, please, again, go to our website, www.ncheteach.org, and check us out and check out our resources, whatever you can do. We want to engage with folks out there as much as possible. So thank you for doing that. And the last thing I just want to mention quickly is I know this show meets a lot of people in a lot of different places, and I'm reminded that every week when people put in where they're from. And I just want to say, with the COVID sort of rearing its ugly head and the number of people who are getting sick rising across our country and other countries as well, but particularly our country, just want to tell everybody, please stay safe, follow precautions, do whatever you can, because you are valuable, your family is valuable, and we want you here for the long haul. So that's from me personally, and thanks everybody for everything, and I'll turn it over to Joanne to wrap up the show.
Yeah, I'm going to say a version of what I tend to always say, except with a little extra oomph. Every week, in one way or another, I thank you all for being here, because this is a community every week, and we have conversation as a community, and we don't necessarily come from the same place or have the same ideas, and that's good, and that's fine. And our being here at this moment matters. It matters extra bonus because we're in such an aware, significant moment. So I do want to thank you all for continuing to take part in this. We certainly, neither Matt nor I thought that we would be doing this for as many months as we are. And I thought, am I going to have things to keep saying after the election? And of course, I then thought, well, darn, of course you are, Freeman. Yes. So at any rate, I want to thank you for being here. I want to encourage you now, without tears in my eyes, to really stand up for what you believe in. And as Matt said, as I always say, stay safe, take care of yourself physically, and take care of yourself mentally. Do things for yourself, relax, take a breath, whatever you need to do. I'm eating a heck of a lot of chocolate, but whatever it is you need to do that, because these days are going to be, what do I want to say? Difficult and strange in ways that we can't predict. And you need to take care of yourself because, in a way, as Matt said, you are important. You are democracy. You matter. And I'll stop with that. And I will see you guys next week.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everybody.